Good morning, everyone. Welcome for a discussion with our team this morning. We've got Yogesh, we've got Isabella, Tommy and myself, Digby, talking about our pathway towards recovering from COVID. What might it mean to the way that we adapt buildings? How do we get back to the workplace? And what are some of the different things we need to keep in mind or deal with as we're helping building owners and tenants get back into these environments in a bit of a new setting. So what I might just ask everyone to do in the team is a quick introduction to your role in Northrop. What's the sort of skill set that you bring to our teams, and then we'll have a bit of a free-flowing discussion. So how about Yogesh, if you can introduce yourself first.
Oh, thanks, Digby. So my role at Northrop's Building Services Manager in Sydney. I'm a principal of the business, which is a partner in business, and my trade background is electrical engineering.
Okay, and Isabella?
I'm an acoustic consultant, specialising in architectural and building acoustics.
And Tommy?
My name's Tommy Sailing. I'm a ICT services and audiovisual engineer based in the Sydney and Parramatta offices.
I'd be curious to know, from your own discipline's point of view, if tenants or building owners are looking at opening their office up, say next week, what are some of the one or two key things that they could be doing right now to adapt, let's say their workplace, let's say an office environment, to adapt to the new distancing regime that we have to work with at the moment. So how about Tommy? I know you've got some burning thoughts on this. What are your sort of key views?
As we've moved towards having all of our meetings virtually through Microsoft Teams and Zoom and all of these other platforms, you've suddenly gone from having a relatively quiet office with all the discussions taking place in dedicated meeting zones or meeting rooms to people having their discussions at their desk with headsets on. Now, this could be quite distracting if there's 5 people in a cluster of desks all having conversations about different things. So starting to have the 1.5 metre social distancing is a help, but having a more longer term acoustic type solution like sound masking, having speakers playing white noise throughout the office to try and muffle the sounds of human speech might be a helpful way to start reducing some of these human-induced distractions.
Bella, are you seeing some big changes that we need to start making if we're going back to these offices that have just got less people and less noise around? Is the white noise system a reasonable thing to start looking at, or there's some...
Yeah, I think so, especially if the HVAC requirements are reduced as well. Having sound masking systems in place can really overcome that.
Yogesh, are there ways with I guess adapting or changing the way that air conditioning might be reconfigured or recontrolled, or the settings be changed to start to address some of these immediate challenges?
It all goes back to how adaptable the existing units are. The key is going to be obviously with social distancing and people's space so far apart. So at the moment, the zones are quite big. Basically, what the quick fix would be to kind of limit these zones and sort of operate in smaller zones. And again, talk to the clients, and if they wanted to get ahead, get something happening at the moment, do some pre-work or some due diligence up front now to see what their systems are like, and then start talking about the options. My advice to any of the building operators would be to start investing now, and look at updating or upgrading some of these older systems to adapt. You don't have to fully upgrade the whole systems, the head end, but I think what you need to do is implement controls in there that could help you.
I'm curious, I'm just fascinated about this idea of contactless journey experience to get to the office. And we can probably remember when the airport started to adapt, where you no longer needed to kick doors open and do touch things with your elbow. It was just no doors and the taps are sensor operated and so forth. Now we're talking about that in an office building. So how might it work that we somehow arrive at the front door of the building and we get to our desk without touching a single thing? Tommy, is that an easy thing to retrofit or recontrol, or are we talking about some fairly serious kit that has to be added to a building?
I think we can start to build on what Yogesh's point was just then, which is trying to retrofit the controls aspects of a lot of these building systems, whether it's HVAC, whether it's lighting, or even the vertical transport, and include some smarter control systems in there, so they can be powered by building management systems or even simpler app-based experiences. So it is entirely feasible that in a building upgraded with more modern IP-based controls, that you'd be able to walk in, sign in with a security pass on your mobile phone, and have the lighting and air conditioning configured to be active at your desk before you even arrive. So with the right controls in place, we're able to actually do quite a lot with old, traditionally mechanical or electrical systems.
This is really fascinating, because hotels have been doing this for years. Somehow it reads that you're close to the building and your room starts to boot up to all of your settings that you had last time you stayed at the hotel. So might that start to happen in the office space? And I know the configuration of the HVAC, of the air conditioning, might be limited in terms of comforting my space, but do you think we'll start to see that whole personalised experience through an app?
Definitely, and the commercial building space can have a lot to learn from a whole lot of other sectors. So as you mentioned, in hospitality, they've been pioneering in that kind of user experience for years, just to make sure that the guests have that premium feel when they're going into and out of a certain hotel. We can start to introduce this kind of technology at a base building level and increase the value adds for any prospective tenants, which will begin to become more important in this post-COVID uncertain real estate economy, where base building operators need to make their particular building more attractive to prospective tenants.
Interesting. I was going to share the story of, I managed to get to a restaurant on the weekend. It's been months. It was cathartic, I've got to say. But we've probably all seen now that they have to have, restaurants and cafes have to have much more separation between settings, which means less turnover for customers sitting there in the restaurant. So I guess they're in the position that they can try and recapture revenue by having takeaway and deliveries and so forth. They can make up the lost ground. We can't do that in an office. The only outsourcing is us working from home like we are today. So in terms of a landlord or a building owner trying to recapture some of that lost revenue, because office floors are less dense now. So that's one really interesting avenue of making it more attractive to come and work in that space. What might happen in a lower density floor space, let's say in the CBD, what might be some ways that a landlord could start to recapture some of that income?
There's definitely got to be a revisit. I know we've seen a lot of childcare facilities. We've had, a bit of retail getting mixed in there as well. I think some of these prime office spaces, especially in the CBD, you might be actually looking at mixing these up, a bit like a mixed-use development in the residential market, to get people in there, make it an active space. I think, the landlords need to really start considering that. And if there is excess space left, probably the longer term is to go back to the adaptive reuse model, which was probably 10 years ago. It was a big thing in the CBD, converting office spaces into apartments and having some office spaces as well. Apartments on the top perhaps where people live and then they can work. Becomes a bit of a community kind of setup, something along those lines.
Bella, I was going to ask you, this idea of having mixed uses within the same building, so different, let's call it different noise requirements, different acoustic classifications. What does that mean to, how does an architect cope with that in terms of room layouts and partitioning and insulation? It sounds kind of expensive to me. Again, what are your thoughts on how we deal with mixed use in a space?
Yeah, the layout's got to be really careful. And if there's going to be fewer enclosed spaces as well to limit transmission of infections, there's going to be speech privacy issues. Having multiple uses in one floor plate is definitely doable, but yeah, we've got to make sure the walls have adequate insulation, full height walls, and yeah.
Tommy, what are your thoughts around the sort of mixed use conundrum?
I'm thinking, again, this could be another way for certain smarter base building operators to figure out a better use of space. So if we treat this post-COVID world as the new normal, and our new way of doing business is mainly through having video conferencing sessions and not really having the era of large boardrooms with 20 or 30 people in anymore, what an operator could do is have a whole series of floors, every second floor dedicated to having meeting spaces shared between the various tenants of the building, which will save the tenancies from having to construct their own meeting spaces. Move towards standards-based ICT services such as Teams, Zoom, and all of these video interoperability platforms. So there's no issue with a Teams person talking to a Zoom person, so that many different companies are able to use the same rooms. And that way we can recapture certain amounts of space in every floor. Each of those rooms are enclosed, so the social distancing requirements are pretty much solved with bricks and mortar, and everyone can begin to feel like they're actually working in a more collaborative space again, with just the added extra of video conferencing rather than everyone sitting around the same table. This might even increase the efficiency of meetings and the way business itself is conducted in the next 6 to 12 months. So I guess all we can do as a society is watch this space.
I'm going to throw you a curveball now. I really don't like this, because I'm the sustainability person in this meeting. I'm not keen on this idea of cutting down my sight lines and connections to the outdoors. I don't like this idea of cutting down the daylight. I want the floor space with all these great diversity of uses and people totally open. So how are we going to make that work in this post-COVID environment?
When you talk about open spaces, I think there's still a space for it. We still need that interaction. We still need all of that. I would actually talk about, extended hours. I think you mentioned that before about shifting the hours. That's one way of doing it, because it provides people a bit of sense of security of not being, crowded on public transport and things, getting to and from work at the same thing. And it also could help with people with children at home, perhaps, shifting those hours over as well. So I'd be saying, different hours of operation that would allow that and provide all of these connectivity features.
Do you think that's, in terms of how the HVAC system or the mechanical system works, is that something that's readily, can an office floor plate readily accept that if we suddenly open it up all into kind of one zone? I know there are
yeah. I mean, it's all to do with programming at the moment. There's a bit of work to be done. Like I said, controls. You don't have to majorly replace all of the systems as such. So at our office in Sydney, when we have the events we hosted, and we increased, concentrate the load, the heat load in certain locations, what we traditionally do is get some supplementary units to cool or provide more cooling and things to that effect. But, switching the AC on for extended hours, obviously, you'll be operating in out of peak hours, so there are some cost savings from electricity point of view. But yeah, it definitely can be done without major overhaul of the system.
Right. We'll see if Bella's got something to say about that. So Bella, if we suddenly take away all the walls in a floor plate and we have a reasonable density of occupants in the floor space, and they're all on Zoom headsets doing work with their dispersed teams and clients and so forth online, how's that going to work in terms of acoustic treatments? Do we have to do anything at all, or a lot?
Oh yeah, desk partitions could be a thing. I know that's going to ruin some sight lines, but if the desk partitions were higher, no, not allowed.
Right, I want to be able to see all of my colleagues across, because that's all about, the connectivity.
Okay, well then you're going to hear them.
So how do we solve it?
Yeah.
Perspex could be an option.
Well,
It's happening. It is happening.
yeah, well, like in the supermarkets now, they've got Perspex infection screens. I don't know, that could be a thing. Or they could be, if they were acoustically absorptive as well, could have a dual usage. I think an important thing is reducing reflections from the ceiling to stop any speech propagating too far across the floor plate. A lot of fit outs have absorptive ceilings already, so yeah, that wouldn't be hard.
Okay. All right. Well, let's let's ramp it up a bit and let's hypothesise that a landlord's decided to bring that refurb project forward by 5 years, and they're going to do a bit more of a refurbishment. So it's pretty much a full strip out, taking out all of the old mechanical systems. They've almost reached the use by date, so we're making the decision. What would be the sort of the big King-Kit design holistic approach if we started from the health proposition first? So let's not worry about capital costs to start with, because there might be a way to solve that. If we focused on human health and well-being first, in terms of clean air, in terms of the quality of the air and so forth in the space, what might be our starting point? How might we do things differently now? Yogesh, maybe you can kick it off.
I think the first thing you talked about well-being and the type of air. So definitely different type of filters and filtration systems we need to consider. You know, it'd be totally at a higher level to limit the pollutants, you know, entering the work environment. That's one thing you'd be reconsidering. The other thing would be to increase the supply air quantities, not just design these buildings to the minimum requirements. I'd be saying increase them, and the main reason for that is again to dilute any of the pollutants rather than operate on minimum levels of supply air. So increase that through good filtration and create the fresh air is obviously good for us. So do that. And again, once you're starting from scratch, look, the key would be to have similar to lighting controls, like addressable type of systems or smaller systems where you can quite easily, without refitting the whole thing, adapt quickly. You know, with designing the system so you can quite easily put up 4 walls without having to reconfigure, rip out tiles and ductwork and things like that.
Okay, my mind got stuck on the fact that you're bringing in more outside air, which has got a higher energy footprint. So does that mean running costs might go up as well in terms of energy?
This could be, again, with working with a good architect, we could actually, I think there's something around fresh air and then openable spaces. You know, I remember talking to our CEO, Jamie, once, and he was just standing out, gazing out at George Street. He goes, imagine if we could just pull this facade off and create like an open space out, like a balcony scenario, which some of the Western Sydney offices have. And I thought, what a great idea. So maybe there's something there. Look, definitely there might be some cost, but a motor runs at a certain level. I don't think it's going to be a huge amount, because it outweighs the wellness versus the cost of running this. I think wellness would win here. I don't think the cost will be that high. I'm sure we can find some efficient system or ways to control the supply of fan.
So I'm going to throw the sort of the curveball here. So if we're doing a full reconfiguration of the mechanical system, we've decided, because we've got lower density in the floor plate and we're trying to drive down our energy costs, have some shoulder seasons where we open up windows. Now, it depends on the facade as to whether we can do that. But what sort of challenges might that create if we start to have openable windows in a floor space during the year?
Look, I've had offices previously where I've operated out of, and we used to manually shut the systems off because, you know, spring kind of 20, 22 degrees, somewhere around that. And people were like, hey, let's just open the windows up. And look, you can provide that level of control, I guess, to the management of this, people managing the space. Open the windows, I don't think there's anything wrong. Again, controls, if you open the windows, the AC will shut down. Some of these things are already part of our national construction code, so I don't think a big deal. It's more of the user preferences inside that will probably drive all of that.
I had a question we asked early in my architectural career on this very topic. How high can a fly fly? So we have openable windows. At what point do flies stop coming in the windows? Never been answered. But anyway, that's an aside. Tommy, what are your thoughts on if we start to open up floor plates and open up windows? Does that present any challenges from your discipline?
I'm going to move to the side and start talking about the electrical discipline and the kind of opportunities we have there to increase the indoor environmental quality, because it is all intertwined. Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, what we want to push towards is having every space to be addressable, whether that's addressable air conditioning systems based on the immediate environment and having a window that's just been opened to bring in fresh air, or whether it's a light level sensor or a time of day sensor, particularly if we want to move towards a 24/7 style workday. because the circadian rhythm works at very different levels depending on what time of day it is, how much sleep you've had, and what your working schedule is, being able to personalise your own immediate workspace to improve your own wellness, I feel is the way that we need to keep on looking in the future. And reading in all of the lighting requirements of the WELL standard to make sure that if you have started working at 10 p.m. at night because of your family commitments, that your sleeping patterns aren't going to be completely destroyed by having all the blue light from your computer in your face at that time of night. So being able to personalise your own working environment is particularly important, I think.
Could be a whole new genre or field of personally controlled, thermally balanced office chairs that keep you warm and keep you cool. And anyway, but that's an aside. So Bella, I'm sure you've got thoughts on if we can start to open up windows into our office space. Does that present some challenges from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it depends where you are. If you're under a flight path, that might not always be an option. But there have been studies that show that having natural ventilation, the benefits of having some fresh air and light and stuff outweigh the noise issues. And if the noise sources outside, for example, traffic, are constant, then you actually are providing even more sound masking and better speech privacy. So there's your sound masking system solution on a budget. Just open your window. But yeah, you can. The AS2107 values can increase by 3 or 4 or even 5 dB for outside noise sources because people just like the feeling of having an open window.
So, all right, I'm gonna throw in the next layer of the curveball here. So I worked on a project. It got put on hold. It was a US headquartered business, and we're doing office building here in Sydney. And because of the 9/11 event in the US, the project got put on hold. And that project was right in the midst of this phase in Australia where we were starting to use underfloor air delivery systems. They were starting to gain traction because of the single pass airflow benefits, the healthy air benefits. They were quieter, they were more energy efficient. They just cost a whole lot more to install on day one, and it turned the sort of delivery or installation process on its head. So let's hypothesize that if we start to focus a lot more on the health and well-being of us inside buildings, and therefore this single pass airflow, so the air molecule comes in under the floor, comes up to us, we breathe it in, and then it gets taken out of the building. What are the pros and cons of that sort of approach? Let's make it more narrow. If we're looking at an existing office building and we're entertaining the idea of doing a full strip out and a rebuild of the mechanical system and all the services, is this possible?
It is a possibility, but definitely with the existing stock, you might struggle a bit to fully, you might get an A- system as such, not an A+ system. If you were to say A+ was the one that was fully working to the optimum, because there'll be physical limitations and how to get air and things below the floor and out.
Yeah, I know it certainly presents challenges in terms of set downs to fire exits and lift openings. You can't go and change all those, so it does require rampings and level change within the floor, but I have seen it done quite well. So.
Yeah, and there are other options, I guess. You can actually, depending on the tenancy arrangement, then you can share the roof space of the level below and then feed things from the bottom up as well. So there's other options there to consider. But yeah, interesting question.
Tommy, so on that one, you've got a whole new playground to work with that's now under the floor. I suppose you can use underneath the ceiling above as well, because it's no longer a sort of a ceiling cavity. We might use that as an exposed slab. So any thoughts on if we were to explore the idea of an underfloor air delivery system, what might that mean for your role?
It would just mean a paradigm shift in the locations of all of the cabling and backbone work that needs to be done throughout the floor plate. So it's not a particularly difficult system to think about. We just need to try and make sure everything is consistent from a top to bottom power and communications delivery scenario. So one of the ideas that's really gaining traction at the moment is the digital ceiling, where every bit of electrical and communications infrastructure is all located within the ceiling, so you can provide adaptable buildings, moving a workstation from point A to point B, because the data outlets and the power outlets are all there in the ceiling just ready to go. That can very easily be adapted to a digital floor scenario, in which you have floor boxes absolutely everywhere on a false floor, and be able to adapt your workspace that way, because everything is running on the same standard of communications cabling and electrical power delivery. Lighting is probably the only final frontier which traditionally should be coming from the ceiling. However, if everything was floor-based, we can rethink the way our spaces are from an architectural perspective, because we only have our lights on the ceiling because that's what we've accustomed to be doing for the past decades of building design. If we were able to adapt to more a task lighting paradigm by having, let's say, floor-mounted lamps or desk-mounted lamps that are powered from this so-called digital floor, then we very truly can have all building services running through the floor, except for perhaps fire detection.
Bella, with the idea of underfloor air delivery, I know from experience that that's a much quieter system, and that was actually a period during our property industry in Australia where it started to trigger these white noise systems to be introduced because the underfloor air delivery was so quiet. Do you think that's still a challenge in the post-COVID floor space, that we had all the air coming from underfloor, so it's much quieter? Does that present problems with the lower density on a floor space?
Probably not. It could be worked around, and yeah, if you need a sound masking system, that would be okay as well. I would just have to note that similar to Tommy, the ceilings not being there would present some reverberation challenges, and also if your walls are going just from the floor to the ceiling, you might have some privacy issues between rooms, and you would have to have your walls going to the slab as well. Then any penetrations going through those would have to be treated.
I'm really interested to know if we're moving back into a post-COVID floor space, whatever that looks like, but let's assume that it's much lower density in terms of the population on the floor, and let's say that more people are spending time at their desk rather than mixing and mingling in spaces. What does that open up in terms of lighting? I mean, if we can invest in a lighting retrofit or an upgrade, what might we do that's quite different now? Maybe Tommy, if you can pick that thread up.
Well, you'll be glad to know, Digby, that it's a great opportunity to save energy. When we're thinking in our post-COVID workspace, we think of an office where people are distanced from each other, an office where only half the workforce might be working at a time, which is why the idea of having a global illumination and an entire ceiling that's covered in your standard LED or, heavens forbid, fluorescent troffers just doesn't make sense anymore. I can see future fit-outs moving towards a highly task lighting based paradigm, so that lighting is there for when you need it and it's not there for when you don't. And this is going to help power the mobilised workforce, the workforce that's working odd hours where they're surrounded by lights to get their own works done, but at the same time be presented with a base level of light, not the full 400 lux that you're accustomed to, but some semblance of light. So if they're working back at night with only a couple of people around them, that they feel safe and secure, and not like the rest of the office is shrouded in darkness. So by having each light fitting addressable and perhaps controllable by either a smartphone app, presence sensors, or a base building operated control system, there's absolutely opportunities to make sure that each space is tailored and lit appropriately for the task that you're doing at that one time.
So it's possible then that I might turn up to the office in a few months' time. I know we've just done a refit, but let's pretend that I'll turn up to the office in a few months' time and I can get onto my app and say, well, it's now 2 a.m. in the morning. Let's say it's 3 a.m. because that's, you know, my clock's all messed up now. I've come to the office at 3 a.m. and I need the lights to kind of give me a little bit of a sunrise, energy boost, so I can program maybe the one light that's above me to have my desk lamp turn on and get my customized lighting environment. Do you think that's possible?
That's right. It's possible, it's feasible, and it is happening right now in high-tech fit-outs around the world.
Yogesh, what might that mean? Are there some simple things we can do to come right back to a simple recontrol or reconfiguration within a ceiling space to condition my own zone in my own workspace? Is that as easy as lighting, or is it a little bit more restricted?
Yeah, restrictive. So this all brings back memories from about 5 years ago. We actually did a boardroom lunch around the future office space. And, you as an architect would actually love this. We actually got rid of the troffers out of all of the ceilings. We have plasterboard ceilings everywhere and pendant lighting. And the whole concept was around having a desk that was actually alive. So what you do, you turn up with your laptop pretty much. And this was something we just kind of brainstormed out. You put your laptop in with no wires connected, self-charging. You had controls for heating and cooling, which will be built into the desk, a bit like a car when you have those little vents coming out as such. And then you could have local, so you could have drop-down feeds from air conditioning units plugged in. So you can have all of these units up in the ceiling or in the floor, and then connecting each of the desks up similar fashion to the electrical, umbilical cords and things to feed power. There are systems there right now. It's all about units and refitting these in and how you look at the workspace. So mechanically, the most efficient way, the traditional way of doing it is large ductwork and units feeding larger zones. But I think definitely there's something around this, the efficiency that you'll pick up from running these smaller systems, locally controlling them, saving power and things, is definitely there, and that's the future. I think.
In this post-COVID environment, with less tenants in the floor space, there's going to be serious pressure on landlords to find ways to reduce running costs and increase the value to try and keep that business plan in place, if that makes sense. So if we're talking about ways to drive down operating costs from a landlord's point of view, is it feasible for facilities management staff or maintenance staff at the moment to increase the number of times that filters are changed and increase the cleaning regime in an air conditioning system, even though there are less tenants and potentially less income coming from rentals?
Yes, it is. It is definitely feasible and practical to do so. I mean, if you go back, back in time, 20, 30 years ago, preventative maintenance was a big thing. And it was all about prevention. I think we've moved to the model of now kind of, putting things in place. It's all around cost rather than prevention. So it's definitely there. These things can be easily done. At the moment, a lot of the buildings in the CBD are actually taking the opportunity with the buildings being empty to do some major upgrades already. There's already a lot of work happening. You're upgrading your fire systems that were non-compliant, say, your air conditioning system. So people are already starting to do all of this. So at the moment, the prices are quite competitive. So I think landlords should be taking advantage of that. Again, this COVID period is only short term for now, but I don't know how long it's going to last, but definitely can be done.
So it's potentially a good opportunity to not so much reposition the building, but create more long life loose fit, as we say in the trade. So allow for future adaptations of occupancy patterns, of operational hours, of the use in the spaces as well. Tommy, does that present some challenges from your discipline in terms of, we've got a 24/7 diverse use refurb happening right now? What might be some opportunities from your point of view?
I think one of the easiest and smartest opportunities would be to get some lighting control in those spaces. And if you still have a building that's still got fluorescent light fittings, invest in LED. Not just any LED, but modern, trusted LED manufacturers that have L80B10 ratings, which means that after 50,000 hours of operation, 80% of the lights will still be functional in that particular LED luminaire. It's important to have this kind of longevity because one of the things which we see time and time again in a base building, especially because we're trying to reduce the amount of contact that we have with other people. People are working at strange hours, and you need these light fittings to always be reliable, and maintenance might not always be there. But having a lighting system that's ready to go and able to adapt at any hour is the best start to have, in my opinion.
What if we go back to completely normal? What if somehow we solve the COVID risk or the fear and we'll just go back to how things were before? What are some of the opportunities or things that we've learned through this experience that we shouldn't forget?
I mean, one word for me would be to invest. I would highly, recommend all the landlords and, tenants as well to actually invest. And what I mean by that is invest in technology. Because, like I mentioned before, times are very unpredictable. Things are happening. Things are moving very fast. So whatever you do, I wouldn't go for the cheapest solutions. I'd be looking at investing in technology with putting things into place that can adapt. And I'd be taking the opportunity now to start ramping up or putting some CapEx, aside and plans in their capital projects to look at your upgrades of your mechanical plant, your electrical plant, your comm systems, making it built in such a way that if we go through this again, how do we come where we don't have to kind of migrate like we did earlier this year?
Interesting. Tommy, what are your thoughts? What should we keep hold of?
If there's one thing that we've really learned from the whole COVID crisis, it's that indoor environment quality really, really matters. I'd hazard a guess that most of the people that are clamouring to return back to the office probably have fairly poor indoor environments at home. And making sure that your office spaces are healthy spaces, spaces that aren't filled with blue light and air conditioning that's too cold, would make them happier, healthier places to work. And that's something which we should never lose sight of in design.
I know some people want to go back to the office because they just need to get away from home for other cultural reasons, which we can't solve. That's not our skill set. From my point of view, I'm really, really curious I think one of the things we've experienced through the whole lockdown is how inefficient so much of our floor space is. So how do we really start to extract much more utility or value out of our buildings? Is it longer operating hours? Is it driving down the operating costs in terms of energy? Do we start to open them up to harness the sort of shoulder seasons where we can have a natural mode? I don't know, but it's really, I think for us, it's really flushed out the fact that we have a lot of inefficiency built into the way that we've traditionally operated and used buildings. So it's opened up some really interesting what ifs about how we might create more diverse spaces, mixed uses in buildings, really extract the value out of the assets that are already there, sweat the assets. Awesome. I'm spent, guys. My head's just full of all these ideas now, and I don't want to go back to being an architect, but this is really fascinating for the whole design fraternity now, I've got to say. Any sort of closing comments from all of us in terms of what's the one big opportunity that our clients could start to explore next week to respond to COVID and create great working environments for their staff? Tommy, maybe if you'd like to go first.
Make sure that your in-office video conferencing systems are up to scratch, because people are now used to Microsoft Teams and Zoom and how easy they are to use.
Watch out is what I heard in the subtext there. Yogesh?
I'd be saying, don't throw your existing systems out. Have a look at what you've got. Try and maximize it, reprogram, see what you can do. Get people like us involved to have a good look at your systems. And you don't have to throw it all out. So, yep.
Excellent, thanks. And Bella, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've got to agree. Make sure your video conferencing systems are up to scratch. And if there's any acoustics issues, get them sorted out quick, smart. come and see us if you need any help.
Excellent. All right. Thanks very much, guys. It's been a really interesting discussion. So I'm Digby from the sustainability team. I head up the Resilient Cities team, and I work with all of our disciplines and specialists around the business to come up with innovative ways to drive down operating costs and embed some really healthy workplaces to work and live in. So thanks, everyone. Catch you later.